Anyway, like I said, we're gonna go ahead and get started. Hopefully we'll have some more people come in. I'm sure the weather has kept some people out. Y'all remember Michael? He's talked to us twice before. What the last time he talked to us? Talked about the Battle of Fort
Fisher.
Fisher. And before that, it was the Battle of Palmetto Ranch.
I think we should adopt him as a regular member. I like him. Yeah.
I tell you, just about. He does a great job coming over. But
Yeah.
he is an officer over at the Tennessee Valley Civil War out there. But he handles all the IT work, and he also works Discord.
Yes.
And you can watch their programs on Discord, and it's really a neat little thing to have. But anyway, Michael is a retired Marine major and flew helicopters for 20 years. And we're glad to have him back with us again today. And I'm going to let him talk now about the Battle of New Bern. Some of y'all may not know
And he's
too
a
much
good
about it.
historian.
Thanks, John. Appreciate it.
Sure.
Hey, everybody, thanks. It's my pleasure to be out here. Thanks for the invite. Obviously, John, Lanny, you guys are always so warm for whenever I come here, and I appreciate it. I won't charge him. No, I'm just kidding. I don't do anything like that because we all love history, and that's why we're here, right? So this is what we need to do to keep the history alive. Just like John was saying, I was in the Marine Corps for a few years, and I really started this presentation because this is in the backyard of Marine Corps Air Station Cherry Point. You'll see some of the charts that we have on it, and you'd be surprised how many active duty Marines go through Cherry Point, first enlistment, last enlistment, whatever it may be, and they have no idea the significance that's right there in their backyard. Yeah. So I built this really in conjunction with a couple of the other guys in the Craven County Craven County Preservation Association, a small group of guys, and we ended up building some signage, became friends, and this is what we did. So by the time I left, I was able to give a couple staff rides to some of the junior Marines to talk about just what happened in your backyard and how it impacts what they do now in the Marine Corps and amphibious operations. So when you watch this presentation, you'll see I'm going to be talking a little bit about amphibious operations. You're not going to see anything grand like Okinawa or Normandy or anything like that, but this is where it all kind of started. All right. All right. Let me test this out.
Yeah, Michael taught me a trick. I wasn't sure if that USB went to that remote, but it does.
So this is the overview. In case the power goes out, lightning, tornadoes or whatever happens, this is what we're going to talk about, and I'll come back. But bottom line, if you forget anything, right, in March of 1862, so when we started talking about this is the part of the Civil War that we're new. It's still kind of, we're in it, you know what I mean, but we're still kind of new. This is really, you don't see movies made on this, you don't see a lot talking about this, but New Bern's a very interesting thing to take a look at. Another good thing is that there is a pretty good preservation movement to help keep things alive. Currently right there you see in the picture, I have Tryon Palace, which is in downtown New Bern. Tryon Palace was the British provincial governor of North Carolina's house / office.
It sure is a nice home.
It sure is, and it burned down.
Wow.
So what you're seeing right there is the results. They got the original blueprints for this place.
Wow.
And actually the ladies of New Bern in the 1950s and 60s had a drive. They relocated, they had some old apartments that were there, they had them moved, and then they had the house built brick for brick to the original specifications of the house.
You're kidding.
And now it's a large, you can go in there with your family, you can tour it. If you want to see what the provincial governor of North Carolina lived in, you can see it all.
But it's at a different location, kind of.
It's downtown New Bern, same location. And they took pains to put it on the exact same location.
Wow.
You know, now some of the other houses nearby it, they've been moved to make a historical district, but the historical district's centered around this place.
When did it burn, Michael? 1800s?
John, this presentation is done on Tryon Palace, sir, so I can't answer your question.
Okay, sorry.
No, I'm sorry. I don't remember exactly,
Yeah.
but it did burn down, and I would think, it's just my guess if I remember correctly, New Bern used to be the capital of North Carolina, then moved up to Raleigh.
Wow.
And at that point, this kind of became defunct and obsolete, so it kind of withered away.
I am sorry, but did you know about the year you said it was rebuilt?
Between 1950s to 1970s.
70s.
Yeah, fairly recently.
Well,
That's why it also looks really clean, because it's fairly new,
Yeah.
you know.
Yeah, they had to raise funding and all that to get it built, but
Yes.
it was nice.
Yeah, they had to raise funding to move other houses that are there. bring in the correct color brick, build it, and then put it back in place.
Hey, I like that picture.
Yeah, so that's me back when I was in the Marines about 25 pounds ago, you know, about 6 or 7 years ago when we started giving. And this right here you see is me giving a staff ride to a bunch of junior Marines at the time, probably around 2017. Really cool stuff. This book here is pretty good. It just came out, New Bern Civil War, and there's the author right there, Mr. Jim White.
Okay.
So if you guys talk about this, you see this and you want to read a little more about New Bern and some of the other stuff that happened on eastern North Carolina and the coast, I strongly recommend looking up Jim's book. Jim worked really hard to keep it very accurate.
So y'all were flying out of Cherry Point there. I didn't mean to get y'all subject. Yes, it looks like a nice book, you know.
Yep.
Y'all were flying out of Cherry Point, huh?
Yeah, and Cherry Point has its roots right there in Havelock, so you'll see. Okay, so recap, right? You guys probably saw this one in your elementary school textbooks, right? This is one of the 2 pages of the Civil War that they cover, you know, unfortunately and sadly. But it is kind of true. And so this Anaconda plan, right? You know, you remember the barricade around the ocean and then Rock on, and we know that. So I want to zoom in real quick on North Carolina. If you look at it, you got a guy there sitting in front of a bucket, or a barrel, I'm sorry, and he says there, poor Eaton, rising. That's what it says, you just can't read it right on there. It's funny, right? You look at the Alabama one. It says, damn old Virginia stole our capital. No, that's pretty funny too. But yeah, you know, so why is it you have North Carolina and you have a guy looking at a barrel of Verizon? You know what I mean? Very, very interesting to take a look at it and think about. Oh, by the way, this is, like I said, I was telling John and Lenny earlier, this would be, when I gave the Fort Fisher presentation, it's kind of out of order. I usually used to give this one first, talk to Junior Marines, then we go over to Fort Fisher. This is towards the beginning of the war, Fort Fisher is towards the end. I'm not from North Carolina, I just live there and I enjoy the history. I'm a Texas native by trade, now I'm an Alabamian after living here for 6 years, which I love. So let's think, where is New Bern? Most people have never even heard of New Bern, right? So here you got Washington, D.C., and here you got Wilmington, North Carolina on the coast, and here is Newport News, or Norfolk, which was a major seaport at the time too.
And Hampton, yeah.
Yep, and kind of smack in the Bazin County, the closer Wilmington, is actually New Bern right there. So you take this, I'm gonna blow it up and put it right through here. So if you were an immigrant coming from Europe, would you like to go to New England, Newport, Rhode Island? Or would you like to go to the graveyard of the Atlantic? Okay? That's this area. Very treacherous on the shoals, currents, hurricanes, shifting tides, and shifting shoals are always moving around. Really hard to tell without a lot of modern technology to keep it there. The Cape Fear River in Wilmington, right? This is not very appealing names for these areas, but it brought in hardy people, right? And the hardy people that came in were looking for places to go. This is where they're at. New Bern, give you a little history on it. 1710, some Swiss and German folks, von Grafenfried, I believe was the gentleman's name who found it. And this is the original maps that they did with the hand drawing when they mapped out the place when they went to. This is it nowadays. It looks pretty nice. But if you look at it, it's kind of like Charleston, right? You got a confluence of 2 major rivers right here, the Neuse and the Trent. And it's right there on there. Charleston's a little further away, but this is broken apart by the Neuse River that comes up through here. And I got better maps here, so don't fall in love with this one, but it's pretty neat. And of course, what I like too is the seal of New Bern is very similar to the seal of Bern, Switzerland.
Yeah.
And the bear with his tongue out is actually period correct. So I like the bear with his tongue sticking out. With the bloody claws too, it's kind of Pepsi is primarily known though for because of Pepsi. That's the birthplace of Pepsi.
Huh.
So Brad's drink, Caleb Bradham, is right here outside on the corner, and you can still go to this day and you can see it. It's not much of a museum, but you can go in there and you can drink a modern day Pepsi full of high fructose corn syrup. And that's not what Caleb had made. But it's still kind of cool to say that you've been there, you know? But why do we care about this little town, right? 1860 New Bern, and sometimes it's spelled with an E and sometimes it's not, depending on what periodical you get it from, was a major seaport. Some of the you go to the Smithsonian and you look at they have on one of the major museums and major seaports of the United States. They had Boston, New York, and then third was actually New Bern. Was it Norfolk? Was it Charleston? Was it New Orleans? Was it Mobile? It was New Bern. So at the time leading up to 1860, New Bern was a very good port. And I'll talk about why. It's actually a primary export port, not a lot of imports coming in. The largest producer of shipping products, I say that, tar, turpentine, pitch, pine, and raw grits. Pine trees need a certain amount of, there's a certain type of soil for them to grow, and that place is very good. Loblolly pines and some other pine trees that make very good pitch, turpentine, and tar are found in North Carolina, especially this portion of it. In fact, this portion here, you look at it, was exported 1/4 of the entire world's pitch, turpentine, and tar. So if you think of the shipbuilding industry prior to 1860s, when it was wooden ships before steel, it was all coming out of right here. Majority of the world's was coming out of here. Very interesting.
Yeah.
In addition, everyone talks about Shenandoah Valley being the breadbasket of the Confederacy, right? Okay, that's true. The 10 counties that surrounded New Bern right here produced 4 times the amount of crops and goods than the Shenandoah Valley did.
Good gracious.
Yeah, very rural in nature. Pitch, turpentine, tar on the forest, and then all the crops that are grown in the area as well. So very interesting. Inland for access, most definitely. You can come in from the ship. The river here that comes in, the Neuse River here, in the middle of it's very deep. It's a little more, now, if you escape from the center of that shipping channel, it's actually very shallow and wide. But you could get some ocean-going vessels to go up into there to a certain degree. Not as much as like you would in Norfolk or the Cape Fear River in Wilmington, but you can move them in and out of there. So you can move a lot of these goods and these stuff out and things in if you need to. Plus, just like Charleston, right? You come in here and then you have the highways of the 1860s, the rivers. You can take this river all the way up to Raleigh, North Carolina.
Trina.
Yeah, it's a long journey, but it beats an overland travel when it's rainy and disgusting and muddy, right?
Yeah.
You can do that.
How far to the north can you go?
You go pretty far inland. You could go a lot further. I forgot exactly how far you go, but if you think of Raleigh on the map, that's pretty good. That's pretty far.
Yeah.
And so anything that you have that's produced in that area can get in and out of from here, through New Bern. So of course, it makes it very interesting. New Bern was the capital of North Carolina before they moved it to Raleigh. So it's an old town, actually the second oldest town in North Carolina. Bath, North Carolina is older by like a year or two. But if you go to Bath nowadays, it's half the size of Portland. You know what I mean? At most. So New Bern was a much bigger area to go to. All right? So remember, we're March 1862, right? What had been happening over to March 1862? The war was supposed to be over in 6 months.
Yeah.
Remember, the South and the North said that. So everybody was hoping that the war was going to be over, right? But what happened? First Bull Run happened. You know what I mean? Not that good. Sumter was a little bit. The Confederacy had a little bit of momentum, and the Union was losing a lot of trust in their people. And some people thought that Lincoln was going to call it off, because this just wasn't working, right? So New Bern became a target for the Union because they say, hey, we need a victory, okay? Well, we've had a lot of problems here, so give me a critical victory that is strategically important, right? But something that is attainable that we can do. So when you look at it, remember it's very rural, right? So there's a lot of farms and slaves, not a lot of people, very agrarian, right, system. So, okay, good, I'm not going to get a lot of resistance. Oh, and there's a lot of slaves there, so possible help, assistance that I can get from those guys. Oh, and it's not really well defended, because all of these troops that are from the area or nearby are busy in Northern Virginia and parts out of West Virginia and doing those things. So it's not really that hard. And we understand that it's probably not well defended either. Interesting. So the Union says, you know what? I think we're going to do this, and this is where we're going to start pointing. You guys know the term Tar Heels, right?
Oh, yes.
And there's a little bit of, some people say, they dug their heels in, I think at the Second Battle Bull Run, and that's how they're like their feet are stuck in tar, they never gave way. And then some people say, well, it's because they exported a lot of tar. What's the truth? I don't know. We'll see. It's somewhere in between, perhaps, maybe a little bit of both. But something neat to think about. What's going on here? You guys may have seen these flags. The one on the left is the flag that would have flown over North Carolinian troops during the Civil War, and the one on the right is actually what is flown today. So a little bit of difference there. Let's talk about the two dates, right? Both of them have May 20th, 1775 on the top. Trivia, anyone know what that is? I didn't think so. Huh?
You were talking about when they found it.
Yeah, what is May 20th, 1775?
The Battle of Alamance or something?
This is trivia. So Mecklenburg County in North Carolina said, you know what, we're going to get away from the British. So the people of good people of Mecklenburg County, North Carolina said, we said that we're going to get away from the British before the United States did. So this is actually the date of the independence for our county. So, okay, interesting. So they put it on there as a way to say, hey, you know what, we're fiercely independent, we don't like tyrants, and this is the date that we're going to highlight. So even now to this day, you go to Mecklenburg County and they have Mech Day. Or this May 20th.
So it's just for the county.
Yeah, the county. But North Carolina's proud of it, so they put it on the flag.
Yeah.
Prior to this one, May 20th, 1861, I think you can imagine what happened on that date, right? North Carolina decides to secede from the Union,
Yeah.
right? So again, they're not putting up with any tyrants, so they say. So that's when they put it on. So that's May 20th. Of course, after the Civil War, they didn't want that blemish on their flag, obviously, so they changed it to this one, April 12th, 1778. No, 1776, April 12th, 1776. That is the Halifax Resolves when the state of North Carolina said that we're going to be independent from Britain. So I throw that out there as some trivia. So whenever you see this flag and you're with your friends, your loved ones, you can always just stump on a little bit of trivia.
All right.
Because nobody knows what the dates are unless they're from North Carolina.
That's good. Yeah.
Right? The old line state, 133,900 men in the Confederacy. So if you look at states' population of white males, and then how many partook into the Civil War and fill in the ranks, North Carolina population-wise was really only 1/9 of the population of the Confederacy, but it provided 1/6 of the troops. So of all the states that provided troops to the Confederacy, North Carolina was number 1. And they're proud of that fact. It's pretty interesting. 30% of its men fighting, you see that, right? Died from the war. That's war, and that's injuries done afterwards as well. It's a pretty high percentage.
They actually lost more men than any other state.
Any other state, that's correct. Especially if you look at it percentage-wise. So props to North Carolina for doing that. I mean, you're looking at 20,000 men dying from disease, 20,000 men from injuries or missing from POWs. That's pretty lot. And to be honest, to give you a full and balanced, they did offer about 8,000 men join the Union. Of that, about 3,100 were white, and then the remaining, estimate 5,000 were colored, either free blacks or slaves who joined the Union from North Carolina. But pretty neat. I've already talked about Fort Fisher, so I don't need to. I kind of segue into that on the next one, but we don't have to go to that at all. All right. Okay. So remember, we talked about it. I said, what can we do at this time? This guy named Ambrose Burnside, right, where we get the sideburns from, is a brigadier general, and he says, hey, you know what? We need to go ahead. So McClellan chose Burnside to go through the East Coast and hit some of these things. Fort Macon is also a coastal installation fort that was nearby. It's in the proximity of New Bern, so it's right there. And then Roanoke was on the way. The Union had pretty much taken all of Norfolk, so they controlled the shipping and stuff coming in and out of there. So they used Norfolk as a headquarters, and they launched their North Carolina expedition. And Washington Plymouth is kind of interesting. I'll get into that one a little bit too. Okay, so we all know Burnside. My kids love that part of trivia with the sideburns. Burnside was an 1847 grad from West Point. He only served 5 years in the Army. He got out after 5 years, and he had tail end of Mexican War, and then he was out west. He was actually under the command of this guy named Braxton Bragg. I think we have heard of him. And then after 5 years, he got out. He went to North Carolina, or back to Rhode Island, where he was from. And he said, I want to do politics and stuff. And he actually was appointed a major general in the Rhode Island militia. So he went from probably second lieutenant to major general in a little bit. And then and he did that for a while. He had some political stuff. He tried to run for politics. He lost. And then he said, yeah, you know what? Forget this. I'm going to go out west again, and I'm going to do the work on the railroad. Very common for most of these Civil War leaders you see, right? And he actually went for this guy named McClellan. McClellan was a big railroad guy, and Burnside worked for him and got smart. When the war broke out, he returned to Rhode Island, and he became a colonel in the Rhode Island Volunteers. They needed more colonels than major generals, I guess. Or they didn't have the strength to have a militia because they were pulling up lots of men. But that's old Burnside. He actually went down there with like roughly 11,000 men. That's on the Army side of the house, not counting the Navy ships. The Navy had pretty good 100 ships to transport those guys. So that is a mix of amphibious carriers for men, cargo, coal, and those kind of things. So pretty good, hefty footprint. If you think about 600 ships, that's pretty good. Here's a picture of Burnside actually at New Bern. You can see him with a hat. And I'll say this, and that's Fort Thompson, which I'll get into in the back there too. But you read about this Burnside guy, he kind of gets a bad rap. He wasn't the greatest, we know that. But as an individual soldier, he was a pretty decent soldier. General, strategic, brainchild, tactician, logistician, not so much, right? But individually, he was a good soldier. But remember, he only had 5 years of experience at this time. And there he was thrust into it. But he's an interesting character. So I'll tell you about him afterwards. That's pretty funny. But all right, so Union side going in, he's got 3 brigadier generals who are the brigade commanders that we got. Let's see, and I just have F, R, and P on there just to keep it simple. But the first one is John Foster, the guy on the left with the F. He's with the 1st Brigade. Foster was pretty good. He was a West Point class as well, and he's 38 years old at the time of the battle, about the same age as Burnside was. He actually helped construct Fort Sumter. So when Fort Sumter had their issues and it collapsed over, he actually became Major Anderson's second in command.
Yeah.
So so it makes sense. He knows about coastal installation and forts and things like that on the coast, so he was also tapped to do that. Let's see. Next one, Jesse Reno, Brigadier General Jesse Reno, the town of Reno, Nevada, is named after him. He was a Virginian. So much like George Thomas, who was a Virginian but stayed with the Union, that's what Reno did. As what Daniel Harvey Hill said, General Hill said, he's a renegade Virginian.
Yes.
And that's what he called him. But yeah. Very interesting, he was actually friends, West Point, with Stonewall Jackson, McClellan, Pickett, A.P. Hill, fellow Virginians and leaders from earlier in the war, so pretty cool. He's actually got famous too. If you guys ever been down to Mount Vernon, the arsenal, just north of Mobile, he's the one that actually surrendered it to Alabamian forces, and Alabama seceded. So Reno, that's his little place, but interesting. Ironically, he actually dies later on at South Mountain. He was shot by North Carolinian troops.
Yeah.
But he goes on. Okay, and then the last one is Brigadier General John Park. He's the young one of the group, 31 years old. When he got commissioned, he was actually 35 at the Battle of New Bern. But he actually ended up, later on in the war, became Burnside's chief of staff. So you guys think of Petersburg, right? Burnside got embarrassed, as he got bruised because his idea was to take the crater at Petersburg.
Yeah.
Well, he had trained all these colored troops to do in there, and And then he was pulled at the last minute because they didn't want to, the color troops are going to fail. So they put in a terrible, untrained unit. Yeah, and when, of course, when the crater fiasco happened, Burnside got fired. And as actually Park, they actually took over from him and he got fired. So he stayed with Burnside off and on throughout the war. Pretty interesting. He also, when he finished with his stint in the Army, he went back to West Point. He was the superintendent there before he retired from the Army eventually, like in 1899. So he survives. There's all the action that you care about for Roanoke. I'm just kidding. This is my attempt at humor, y'all. So when the U.S. forces left out of Norfolk, they went down to Roanoke. Roanoke, if you think about it, like island hopping campaign of World War II, they were going to go south into Roanoke, North Carolina, and take the east coast of North Carolina. Well, the Roanoke, just like it was when the British, why did the British get Roanoke? Why did they put the lost colony on Roanoke? Put it inland a little bit. It's in an island. The Spanish couldn't see it from the beach. Lots of little coves and stuff like that. So the Confederacy had some small troops. They actually called it the Mosquito Fleet. In and around Roanoke, small boats, not a lot of firepower. They didn't have a lot of men, plagued with sickness and heat. So when 100 ships, 11,000 men roll into Roanoke, in fact, the general who was in charge of Roanoke at the time got sick. And then General Henry Wise was the one that took over. Wise got sick, and Colonel Henry Shaw was the one that took over. It fell fast. We're like talking a matter of 2 days. It was not really even a fight. You won't even see much of this Roanoke in textbooks. It's a footnote to New Bern. You know what I mean? So enjoy my humor there. But that's where they're at. So if you think 7 to 8 February, when Burnside and his troops came down from Norfolk, this is what they did. The first thing they did. February, miserable weather, whatnot, right? Okay, now before Burnside gets to New Bern, here's the Confederate leadership that we're looking at. Let's start with the guy on the right over there. The guy on the far right is Colonel Zebulon Vance. He was a colonel at the time, and after the Battle of New Bern, he actually becomes governor of North Carolina. So he leaves, and then he surrenders it, and he surrenders his command over to this guy here. I know I'm kind of going backwards, but to this guy right here, Lieutenant Colonel Birdwin. But yeah, so Vanceboro, North Carolina, named after him. And in fact, if you guys read about General Pickett and he hung some deserters in Kinston, have you guys ever hear any of those kind of things? He was the governor at the time, and he actually did not like what Pickett did, but I'll let you guys read about that one. The guy in the middle is Henry King Birdwin, the boy colonel. You guys ever heard this guy, the boy colonel? During the Battle of New Bern, he was a lieutenant colonel. He was 20 years old. He'd come out of VMI, and they needed people to man up, and he got. And then actually, when Vance on the right got elected after the Battle of New Bern, he became colonel at 20 years old, like 3 months shy of his 21st birthday. So the boy colonel is where it was. Now I'll say this. If you guys remember me talking about Galusha Pennypacker at Fort Fisher, despite their being aged, his men loved him, and he was a very good leader. He was sound tactically, he was brave, and he didn't let age get in his way. In fact, he actually dies later on. Let me see exactly where he dies, I can't remember. Gettysburg, day 1, July 1st, taken McPherson's Ridge. He shot through both lungs and he dies like within 2 hours afterwards. And he actually, he was leading from the front, his unit, the 26th North Carolina, there. And that day, 13 color bearers got shot and killed on July 1st. And he was one of them where he was leading the charge, and the color bearer next to him got shot. He picked up the flag, come on guys! And then he got shot, and he got killed. So he actually received the Confederate Medal of Honor posthumously. Pretty interesting. And then the guy on the far left there, that's Brigadier General Branch. He is actually a lawyer. I think he was from Tallahassee originally, but he was the the guy in charge of the defense of New Bern and the guy ultimately responsible. But very interesting guy. He gets killed too. He gets killed in Antietam. If you go to Antietam, they have those cannons that you see pointed into the ground. And one of the 6 that are there from him is General Branch, Lawrence Branch. But even though he was a lawyer by trade, he was actually a pretty decent general, so they say. So what you're looking at is, you're looking at some guys who are young, relatively inexperienced. They're fighting in their backyard in North Carolina. So they got that going for them. So let's talk about the defense of New Bern. So we know it's an important city. We know they don't have a lot of troops. They know that it's going to be a target for the Union eventually, and they know the Union will probably bring a little bit of their Navy ships to bear. So how can we, with an inferior force, thwart a superior numbered foe? So this river, like I mentioned here, this Neuse River, it goes right up into New Bern, right? Pretty long, like I said, it's deep in the middle, but towards the outside, it's very shallow, wide and shallow. Still to this day, you can do that. You can still see it. They're going to deny New Bern to anyone who's not from that area, who has a pilot who knows the ability. They actually dump in about 200 torpedoes or landmines up in that area, known areas. They sank pilings. They got wood trees, and they sharpened them up. They put metal tips, and then they sunk them down in the water, so it's just below the water lines. You can't see them, so if your ship hits it, it's a wooden ship, it's going to puncture the hole and you're going to sink. So pretty good way of looking at it, all over the place. Then in addition to having all this area mined and booby trapped, they're going to put some gun emplacements along the coast here to cover that. So if you get your boat stuck, they'll just shoot you from the shore and you sink. So not really good. This side has nice flat beaches, topography, where if you're going to land people, you can do that. The other side, the river has higher bluffs, pretty high, up 10 feet or so. You can't really land people. So they know if I barricade this and I bombard it and I cover it up, right? Like if you get a defensive position, you put concertina wire out there, right? Or triple strand barbed wire, or whatever it may be. Because you know that's not going to kill anybody, but it's going to slow them down, and then you can shoot them with guns. So that's what they did here, and that was their defense in depth, because they knew that if they were going to land troops, they had to land on this side. So what they ended up doing was, here you'll see I'm going to on Fort Thompson, which is a mile long. Well, Fort Thompson, that's cool.
Yeah.
Fort Thompson right over here, anchored it, and then there was the Fort Thompson line that they did, which was a mile wide. Then they did another one down here called the Croatan line, which is very similar to the Thompson line. They knew that the Union troops were going to land over here. They had no choice. So they prepared accordingly. Okay. All right. Here's the anchor site. So zooming in here a little bit more, right? There's the city of New Bern coming down here. So you see this old one that have the anchor, right? That depicts the anchorage site. In today's modern world, we call it a modified location, a MODBOC, or a marshalling area for amphibious ships. Today, you would do that over the horizon so they can't see where you're at. Well, then back in those days, they didn't have, you know what I mean? Where over the horizon would take you, see it tomorrow by the time you get there, right? So what Burnside did was he put his ships right here at the neck of this, so he could move as he wants here. And then he knew when he got anything further up north of the Neuse River there, that it was going to be a little more contested, but it was safe. So March 12th, that's where he anchored him. Now, courtesy of my friends at the Craven County Preservation Association, we ended up putting signs right here on Cherry Point Marine Corps Air Station. So if you look here at the sign, it's on the Cherry Point Officers Club. You look out here, this is actually where they anchor the boats, which is just right here. And you can see it. But yeah, so think about it, you have 100 ships, so the area needs to be wide enough for you to get those things, weigh anchor, and then the ships swing on the anchor. They all do that with the tides. So you gotta have a lot of room, and they're able to do that. Here's a picture of some lithographs from the Harper's Weekly. If you look at how they did it. So you got 100 ships, the majority of them are steam powered. They put up a lot of smoke. You can see that coming from a mile away. Modern day stealth and low to the water, amphibious landing vehicles, there's none of that, all right? We're gonna land with force and we're gonna take whatever we need. So this is fun. This is a realistic how it would have looked. And look at this one, stealthy and quiet.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Not a single puff of coal coming from the ships. And there's no sails either, so they're magically under, I mean, they're under magic fairy dust power, I guess, according to that picture, right? You know what I mean? But it is pretty cool.
Yeah, the fleet of sins, the Moose River, the sin.
Yeah. So here is what the Neuse River looks like, and this would have been the side that they landed on. So it's kind of hard if you think of Neuse River. But you can see the topography right there. Nowadays, modern days, you would land SEALs, Force Reconnaissance guys, underwater. They would do an investigation. They'll take a look at it and see how it is. Look at the tides when they're coming in. They'll figure out all those good things. Well, those were a little bit limited, you know, but you could tell. And then with a little bit of human intel, you find out that, yeah, you can land troops here. So it works pretty good, and it's conducive to amphibious landing. So what they did was they came over here and they landed in the vicinity of Slocum Creek. That last slide I said right here, you're looking out at the anchorage area. You just change the angle and you can see right where they landed in the vicinity of Slocum Creek.
So what direction is that where they landed? Would that be to the west there, I guess?
So they were anchored here and then they landed there. And what you'll see is you'll see them come up and then go that way.
Yeah, okay.
This is another one. This is pretty cool, right? How many of y'all were in the military? Okay, good. So just think about this. This is the Harper's Weekly, landing of the troops. Yeah, follow me, right? Looks pretty good, right? Easy, right?
Not really.
Yeah. So for everybody else who's been in the military, blah, blah, these guys, they do not look happy. This one, the actual newspaper report said that they were accompanied by the band playing the national anthem and all these other patriotic songs. Maybe for the first wave or something, maybe with Burnside, some of his
That
guys.
was the Normandy Beach, right?
Here's everybody else just slogging through waist deep or water and muck. The weather was terrible. It was cold, damp, foggy. It was just miserable. And if you look at too, back in those days, we have amphibious tractors and things that go up right up on the beach. You don't even have to get your feet too wet nowadays. Helicopters and things like that. You see these guys? Get off the boat and then when it gets low and off they went. So they carried everything. So imagine you're one of those privates, just miserable, right? You're going to this town, New Bern. It's gross, right? And here you go. All right, so courtesy of Google Maps, this is what the area looks like now. This is where they landed. And then, like I said, here's the defense in depth. Croatan Line, which was a defense fortification. Fort Dixie was right there to shoot gunboats. The Thompson Line was right here. And then over here is Fort Ellis, Fort Lane. And you come to fight off New Bern. What you don't see on here is that all along here, if you got too close, they had plenty of people with rifles shooting. So, yeah, if you were in a gunboat, you'd probably be safe, but you stick your head up, you're probably gonna get peppered. So it makes things pretty interesting.
Did they have any artillery?
Okay, so they did have some artillery, but the majority of it stayed on the boats because landing it was terrible. And it actually worked out because a couple pieces that the Union actually landed their artillery with were pretty much useless.
Okay.
Because of the woods. Remember all those loblolly pines I'm talking about making tar? This is dense woods right here. You know what I mean? I used to live there, and I'd go in my backyard to go hunting. Tons of pines and black bears too. Watch out.
Yeah.
You were raised up in that area?
No, this is where I was stationed.
Oh, stationed.
My last tour in the Marine Corps. But really, it's 10 miles away. This isn't Gettysburg travel distances. This is pretty short. But when the weather's bad, roads are bad. There's only one major road that they call it the Beaufort Road that went through here. It's still there to this day. Well, it's a different road. It's not called the Beaufort Road anymore. It's a major hard surface asphalt, 2 lanes median, 2 lanes on the other side road that you can do. But in those days, it was a dirt road, and it's muddy. So now it's just disgusting for movement. But that's what the Union was looking at when they came into attack New Bern.
Did the Confederates have any cavalry that was scouting them as they were advancing?
They had limited cavalry that they kept in reserve, but that's it.
So the first line of defense was called the Croatan line, I had mentioned to you. It's right here. And they took advantage of a natural creek that was there, and they built into that creek, and that's where they put the guys. It was actually a very well done fortification. But after Burnside landed over at Slocum Creek, the gunboats provided support a little bit up the news that they could provide, and the actual Confederates who were in charge of the Croatan line thought that they were going to land behind them, so they abandoned their works. And so all the Confederates that were here moved back to a more fortified position to the Fort Thompson line. But you can kind of see it, so you think about it, right? You have all the woods. Probably the majority of those forts were probably cleared out around the battle line. We know they were at Fort Thompson. We don't have a lot of words, but we can assume so for the Croatan line. See if I can show you another cool picture of it. There's a Croatan line to this day. Or so I think, the best I can tell by researching it.
Yeah.
I lived about over here. This is right nearby my house. And I'd come in here and I'd talk to all these people and they go, oh yeah, all these Civil War guys were always in here. And that's it right there. And you can see that there are still man-made trenches there till to this day. It's covered up by trees, and if you drove past it, you would never see it.
The neighbors say they did found a lot of Civil War artifacts or evidence in there. Hunting, you mean?
And this is funny too, because here's
That would be the old Beaufort Road. Right over here on this side was a blockhouse. After the battle, the Union secured New Bern, so they guarded the railroad. And there's a cluster of trees like this that's right here, and the blockhouse is still there to this day. You drive right by, you have no idea.
Wow.
It's on someone's private property. It's kind of like that fort that's near the Sulphur Trestle Creek. That there's a fort there that you can't tell. People ride their bikes and up and down the trail. Remember it?
Well, it's housed up on top where the actual fort was an earthen fort anyway. Yeah.
So we're going to talk a little further. So Fort Dixie, which is a little further up the Neuse River.
This is it getting blasted and everything. This is Fort Dixie now.
Can't really much there anymore. But that's a VFW post. So at least people aren't going to be building houses there on it, but you have no idea. But there's a good American teaching his kid marksmanship, and I appreciate
Target
that.
range out there.
Fort Thompson, a little further up, this is how it looked on the coast, and you see it's overlooking the Neuse River. And then here was a daring ship to go up, hit it. This is it now. There's Frank Lloyd Wright or some kind of house there, you know what I mean? But you can see there's the remnants of Fort Thompson. It's all gone, you know what I mean? It's completely sad, but oh well. Okay, so I mentioned that 10-mile
Axis of advance that Burnside did to get to New Bern. Right after he went to the Croatan line was abandoned, he kept going a little further. They only marched 6.5 miles over 7 hours because everything was getting stuck in the mud. It was miserable. Plus, he's got stuff flowing from the ship, his supplies, and he wanted to get all that off. So in case something happened or it was worse than he thought, he could fall back on it and get ammo and those kind of things. You know what I mean? The rapid offload from the ship wasn't there like we see today. Modern day amphibious operations, as soon as the first troops are ashore, the logistic train starts, and you start going helicopter, landing craft, air cushion, all ferrying back and forth to unload as fast as they can, so that the Marines or the Army guys who are ashore can easily reach that without having to go onto a ship. So it's the same thing, only a lot slower. He had 11,000 men. That's kind of a lot to control. In an unknown area, there was no national reconnaissance office providing satellite imagery. There's old stuff. There's human intel for anybody who is pro-Union that you could get your hands on. So maybe some old maps that were found that you could get. And then scouts, very tough moving. So a lot of times Burnside was not really sure exactly what he was getting into. You hear rumors. You don't know which one's true until you make first contact, right? So here's the Fort Thompson, which was the anchor of the Confederate defense of New Bern, and it had lots of guns. You saw it blowing up on one of those images, right? And then here you have a 1.5 mile line. So think of a massive trench work that was at the very beginning of the slideshow, and then you had this is inaccurate.
they had a half mile of cleared fire. So all these woods within a half mile of this Fort Thompson line was felled timber. Because if you're here, you want to open this up so you can train these guns and you can shoot, right? Here, if you weren't shooting onto the river. And plus, if you could see them, you could attack them. And if you keep your woods right next to it, they'll sneak up on you and you really have no idea. And even though you'll hear the sound an army makes, you won't be able to identify how many. So if you fill those timbers, you can see pretty far out. So in the middle, you'll see it right here, it says a brick, I think it says brick ward, brick kiln, kind of right there. This train track that you see here today is still there. That goes to Beaufort, North Carolina, not Beaufort, South Carolina. There's a difference.
It was at Beaufort, okay?
This goes to Beaufort, from New Bern to Beaufort. And that brick kiln, it's kind of interesting too. When you go and if you ever explore this area, you'll see bricks from that area, scattered still to this day. Little brick kiln. But the brick kiln and the railroad track was like the halfway point for the majority of Branch's forces, and this is what they did. Here's that cavalry you mentioned. It was kept in reserve, and it was not a full-blown Wheeler or Forest cavalry. These are city folks, militia types, nothing good. No dedicated cavalry which would go out and recon and report back. The good news is that people could come and go. And the train track was never shut down because Burnside wanted to keep the train tracks intact because he was going to eventually stage an attack on Fort Macon, which is down in Beaufort. So he wanted to keep the trains able to go because he was going to quickly go down that way. This is kind of interesting. All this is a swamp area right now. And you remember the boy colonel that we mentioned, Bergwin? It was his idea, and he actually came over here and he clogged up Bullen Creek and flooded this area. So in addition to being a gross February swamp area from the winter and stuff, he made it even thicker. He brought the water level up. A good feat of engineering so that any of these guys who try to go in there, oh man, you just really got slowed down. So all of these gun and rifle pits, they just pick you away. And it was clear enough because it was water, not underneath foliage. They could see pretty far. So it was a big killing field. So good job on these guys using the terrain for an anchor for the line and also against the imposing U.S. forces. So when I talk to the Marines, we talk about using the natural ability to funnel people in. This is what they did. They knew they were going to stop them here, and they were going to get funneled through here. Now, to this day, this is what I don't understand. You know you're going to create a large force here to stop them. You know you're going to slow down here, right? And you know they're probably going to advance through here because it makes more sense. Would you put militia in the middle? No. They did. They did. And Branch, when the militia started getting their attack, they started folding real quick. And Branch actually ordered reinforcements to come over and reinforce those militia. But due to communications on the battlefield, it didn't get there in enough time. So eventually when the militia got a little worried, they started rolling away. Well, when they started rolling away, these guys were stuck in a swamp, right? And these guys are over here. Now, one other thing for amphibious warfare that I like to talk about to the young Marines was this time is that you can negotiate anything slow enough. You know what I mean? So if you're coming up the Neuse River, you may not be able to see mines too well, but you can creep and you can have somebody going, okay, a little bit more to see, yeah, there's underwater pilings, right? So the Union gunboats preceded the movement of the Union Army, and they shelled Fort Thompson and took it out. They also started shelling this line right here, and it got so, they were actually very good about it. And then as we teach in any kind of combined arms class, when you have a supporting fire, such as artillery or mortars, you always try to lean into it a little bit because the enemy's keeping their heads down, so you're right there. They're still learning, right? And some of those shots from the boat kind of started getting into Burnside's men. So they had to back off a little bit, and then they had to run to the coast, give them flags, and tell them, hey, stop firing. Because the naval the naval artillery was that effective. In fact, it was a little bit effective against Burnside's men, right? So they had to back them off a little bit. But regardless, at the end of the day, these guys peeled away, and this gap was exploited, and then the forces came through here.
Kind of like Chickamauga.
Kind of like Chickamauga, right? Yeah, well, not as easy as Longstreet going through the gap there, but it was there, it was contested. It took them a little bit. This Massachusetts, 21st Massachusetts also came in here as well, and they got battered, and then the 4th Rhode Island came in behind them and actually and explored that gap and made it go through. But,
Along the railroad.
yep, along the railroad. So, talk about that artillery that they couldn't use. They had this muddy road to move it up. You know what I mean? And then you can't really move it. You can't. I guess you could, depending on the terrain. You know what I mean? You can move up the tracks, I guess, but it's not that very effective. And all this was still dense, thick woods, so artillery was not good. What it really took was hardcore fighting, infantry assault, getting in there and doing God's work, right? Okay. There's a picture of the Fort Thompson line. You can see it, hand-to-hand combat for 2.5 hours. The battle took about 6 hours, but the actual hardcore bayonet, man-on-man, fighting like at Franklin was 2.5 hours. It was some pretty good fighting. People love to say that the Confederates folded. It was a hard-fought battle, and they did a very good job, and they actually did a very good job, and they almost repelled the entire Burnside force. However, once that militia in the center broke and they started folding up, they did call a retreat. And the North Carolinians retreated back. They just, let's see if we go back one. Then they retreated and they came back this way and they crossed the Trent River and then back into New Bern. Here's it nowadays. This Craven County Fairgrounds, roughly, this post, remember I said it was Fort Dixie? So right around here, and I think this is the little nub that was Fort Thompson's left. So if you were to draw a line that comes from here, like this, that was the Fort Thompson line.
Hmm.
This is the Beaufort Road. This is the swamp that I mentioned, and you look at all these houses, right? So right here is the New Bern Civil War Battlefield Park. So you all ever do go up there? What is left of the New Bern battlefield is not even a third of the actual Thompson line.
Yeah.
And you can see the fight they do against the housing encroachment, right? You see all this?
Oh, yeah.
Thankfully, there's a swamp there, so you can't build a nice subdivision there. You know what I mean? So you can preserve it.
Up there at the battlefield park, Michael, do they have some monuments and stuff, or they usually just most kiosk info panels and stuff?
I got some good pictures for it, but nothing monument-wise like you would see at Chickamauga or Shiloh or Gettysburg.
About how big is it, a few acres or something?
Yeah, pretty good. All definitely walkable and definitely fun to do.
Okay.
This is roughly the vicinity of this area. Probably a little further up was actually the Thompson line. This is the Craven County Fairgrounds area right now. And you go back here and you see all these houses. There's Burnside Avenue, Reno Street, and things like that. It's kind of cool. On the battlefield park, these rifle pits that you see are the actual rifle pits that were shot in 1862.
Still there.
So they ask you not to go in them.
Yeah, trench lines, yeah.
But I got kids and I sneak them in there. My kids don't destroy them, but I want them to enjoy history so they can preserve it. And we're not going to do any damage to them. You know what I mean? We're good stewards of that. Good place where you can see it. After the battle, after the Confederates collapsed, they crossed the Trent, they went back in. Burnside by nightfall had gone into the city of New Bern, and he had, started dispatching orders by 8 or 9 o'clock at night. You can see this if you look on here. General Park is actually over here on the left column, our left column of the house. But this is the Slover Bradham house. Bradham, remember Caleb Bradham, the Pepsi guy? He had eventually built the house.
Yeah.
Periodically, every few years, his house comes up for sale.
Huh.
If anybody wants to buy it.
Wow.
I don't have that much money, but it's good. After the battle, you can see this right here, New York Herald, right? Boom! This Eastern North Carolina probably never graced the front page of the New York Herald until now. You know what I mean? And this is another insight where you see, if you look at Burnside, he's got a big old boxing glove, he's going to hit this redneck Southerner, right? One glove's off, he's putting the other one off, so put the other one on. But this kind of launched Burnside. He succeeded, he didn't lose too many men, and he got the Union victory that they so well needed. So it was very highly touted, right? Let's see what else happened afterwards. Here is New Bern up here, and you can see they put a whole bunch of forts. I mentioned some of that blockhouses. Here's the old Croatown line, and they kept this railroad that goes over to Beaufort in place. The Union actually kept New Bern for the duration of the war. There were two other attempts with the South trying to retake New Bern, and they all failed. Pickett, Hoke tried, and it didn't work. At that point, after the Union had a foothold in New Bern, they just resupplied it with men, equipment, and Confederates could never really rally attack. They even tried a daring maritime raid. I thought was pretty cool, and sunk a ship. But
How would, that would be pretty tough terrain getting down in there, wouldn't it?
yeah, a lot of ships coming in, and then once they got the access to the railroad, they could move things in and out. But yeah, they kept the troops and the equipment flowing.
You ever notice that engineer drew that in May 1864? Yeah.
Yep, 64, you got it.
Yes, yeah.
This is actually Ennis Palmer. He actually became the commanding general of New Bern for the second half of the year, and he repelled one of Pickett's and one of Hoke's attacks to take New Bern, and he was set fast like a rock. Here's the battlefield park. No real monuments, but the preservation, the county and the city have done a good job of laying it out and saying and showing how the battle worked. You can see Battlefield Adventure Day. There's my two kids dead.
You knocked him out, huh?
Yeah, it was so funny. Like, all right, we need some Union and some Confederate reenactors, and like everyone was wearing gray, and then we got a whole bunch of these Union hats. Like nobody wanted to wear it, so my kids were conscripted. But this is them shooting and attacking the Fort Thompson line.
Conscripted volunteers, right?
Yeah, that's right. And this is my daughter over here when she was just doing stuff. And this is funny because years later when I built this presentation, I went to the website on this, and I was like, hey, yeah, this is us shooting a cannon, right? And I didn't even realize that's me in the blue shirt right there. I had no idea. So my backside's famous, I guess. But they do this every year, and they invite kids out there and family to go out there and see it. So pretty good in March. If you guys are ever in Eastern North Carolina, New Bern's a pretty cool place. Very similar to Charleston. It's got a nice downtown area, historic area. Maybe a little bit like Mobile, I guess, a little bit, but you know, more like Charleston. Good place to go. Somerset Place up there, Pettigrew State Park, it's a little further away. Has Lake Phelps, a 10,000-acre spring-fed lake. They do all these bass competitions and everything out there. It's beautiful. But that's where General Pettigrew, his boyhood home is. And if you go out to Somerset Place, they actually reconstructed all the slave quarters and everything to a T. So you can really take a step back in time to see how it was if you get to go to Pettigrew State Park. Downtown New Bern, right next to Tryon Palace, is a house that General Lou Armistead was born in as well. Wow. They moved some of the old houses downtown to make a historic district, and you can see that this is the front bedroom that Lou Armistead was born in. Baby Lou. Right? You go over to Kinston, and you have a CSS Noose, which is a full-size replica of a Confederate ironclad that was made in Kinston, and then it actually was scuttled towards the end of the war.
Yeah, I was wondering about that.
Yeah, when I think when Sherman was going to Goldsboro and stuff towards the end, this thing was finally finishing production. They scuttled it, and they pulled some of it out, but this is a full-scale replica, and certain days you can actually go inside there and take a look and see how it looked. Wow. Y'all been to the, which one is it? You go to Vicksburg, is it the Cairo?
Cairo.
The Cairo. You can see it on the outside. Well, this one, if you get a chance, you can go inside and see it. And it's full. It's full. You can see, there's no ribs. It's a full-blown ship. You can see it.
Been there at Cairo, John? Oh, yeah.
Yeah, here's Somerset Place I was mentioning to you. It was where Pettigrew actually grew
I thought
up.
that might have been Benny's place at Chapel Hill. I didn't know.
Bennett's Place, Chapel Hill, it's a little further away, but yeah, you can go check out that place, and that's kind of nice. And that's just like Tryon Palace,
Yeah.
Bennett's Place burned down, except this chimney. And they have the blueprints because the builder who built Bennett's Place built some other houses in the area, and they had the blueprints, so they rebuilt Bennett's house around his chimney.
So you can go see where Joe Johnson surrendered, in Chapel Hill.
About a two-story home, I guess.
Yeah, it's primarily one story, and then there is a second floor, but it's reduced for a bedroom or two. That's about it.
Okay.
And then Monroe's Crossroads is over there at Fort Bragg.
Bragg, I don't think you can get on board now. I think it's on the base. I think you have to have base access or special tours.
Hasn't changed the name of Fort Bragg or something like that.
Fort Liberty.
Yeah, Fort Liberty.
Fort Liberty, yeah.
I'm not a big fan of Braxton Bragg, so I'm okay with renaming it. Of all the leaders, you're gonna name it Bragg.
Yeah, I've always wondered about that. He's my nemesis. He's such an idiot.
But you know, he's kind of like Mayor Benjamin Butler. Guy's an idiot.
Yeah.
But he had all this clout. Jefferson Davis loved Braxton Bragg. Just how? Nobody else did. Braxton Bragg even didn't like Braxton Bragg. You remember that one incident where he yelled at himself in the Mexican War? The guy's a little psycho.
A lot of the connection,
You thought everybody else, they were fighting yourself.
their wives were school chums.
Yeah.
Their wives went to school together.
Yeah.
He was a good trainer. He was
Wasn't that the case with Bragg and,
That's what we're talking about.
and Beauregard or,
No, Bragg and, that Jeff Davis.
President Davis, yeah.
So there I got a whole bunch of sources, just so y'all don't think I
Oh, yeah.
knew all that. I actually wrote it all.
There's a Fort Thompson line as well. It's just a little lithograph.
You guys got any questions or anything?